There's something strange about organized faith, something almost no one wants to say out loud. It claims to be the guardian of morality. Yet everywhere you look, the guardians keep failing their own rules. Leaders who preach purity but hide abuse, institutions that demand sacrifice while drowning in wealth, sermons about compassion coming from people who show none. And here's the unsettling part. This isn't a few bad apples, it's a pattern, baked into the system itself. Because the moment morality becomes organized, it stops being about goodness and starts being about power. And once you see that, you can't unsee it, the illusion of moral authority. We grow up hearing that religious leaders stand on a higher ledge than the rest of us, not just physically on a pulpit, but morally on some invisible platform. They are presented as wiser and purer, people who walk a straighter path and think deeper thoughts, people who somehow see more clearly because a title was placed in front of their name. And it happens so subtly that most of us never stop to ask where that idea even came from. We assume the title reflects inner character. We assume discipline because the clothing looks disciplined. We assume holiness because the rituals feel holy. Image becomes truth before we ever examine it. But here's the contradiction at the heart of it. The position creates the image, not the other way around. The moment a priest or pastor or imam steps forward, the audience automatically fills in the blanks. We project virtue onto them, almost involuntarily, as if authority itself is proof of moral quality. They do not earn trust through their behavior. They receive it the moment they take the role. It is inherited, automatic, and unquestioned. And inherited trust brings inherited power. That is where the real danger begins. Because power that has not been earned cannot be held accountable in the same way. People hesitate to question someone wrapped in sacred language. They silence their own doubts, out of respect, or fear, or habit. Entire communities give the benefit of the doubt simply because tradition tells them to. And once someone can act without being challenged, once their word becomes more important than their actions, once criticism starts feeling like blasphemy instead of healthy scrutiny, the conditions for corruption are already in place. Not because every leader is malicious, but because the system protects them from the consequences that shape real morality. These cracks always start quietly, but they never stay quiet for long. When institutions protect themselves, not victims. Think about how any ordinary organization behaves when wrongdoing is exposed. A company caught covering up abuse would face investigations within hours. Shareholders would panic. Employees would speak out. The entire structure would be expected to collapse unless it immediately confronted the truth. That is how normal accountability works. Actions have consequences because systems rely on trust, and once trust is broken, survival requires honesty. But religious institutions operate on a completely different logic. When they bury evidence or shield perpetrators, the public rarely sees the same level of outrage. Instead, the institution reframes the scandal as a threat to the faith itself. Not a threat to people, not a threat to children or families or communities. A threat to the image. And once you redefine harm as an attack on the sacred, everything becomes permissible in the name of protection. Predators get quietly moved to a new city. Victims are encouraged to forgive rather than seek justice. Meetings are held behind closed doors with the promise that prayer and reflection will somehow resolve what law and accountability should handle. Transparency is replaced with ritual. Responsibility is replaced with repentance. Justice is replaced with silence disguised as humility. People who come forward are often told they are risking division or damaging the reputation of something holy. The burden is placed on the wounded while the powerful hide behind scripture and ceremony. And with each relocation, each buried file, each whispered apology, the moral message becomes unmistakable. The institution matters more than the individual. The hierarchy matters more than the truth. This is how morality begins to decay, not dramatically or loudly, but slowly, through countless small decisions that prioritize image over integrity. Once the protection of the institution becomes the highest good, genuine moral behavior no longer stands a chance. Wealth, wrapped in righteousness. Walk into many religious centers, and the first thing that hits you is the grandeur. Gold-lined altars that shine even in dim light. Marble floors polished so perfectly you can see your own reflection staring back at you. Stained glass windows that could pay off a family's mortgage with a single panel. Everything is crafted to feel sacred, yet the sacredness is built on extraordinary wealth. The atmosphere whispers holiness, but the materials shout luxury. Then step outside those same buildings. The air changes instantly. The marble becomes cracked pavement. The gold becomes cardboard signs held by people who have nowhere else to go. A few meters separate opulence from desperation, yet the divide feels like another world. And still, this contrast is rarely questioned. It has been normalized for generations, as if poverty is supposed to kneel quietly at the feet of divine abundance. Organized religion tells the poor to be humble, to embrace simplicity, to trust that their reward will come later. Meanwhile, many leaders live with the comfort and security of royalty. They condemn greed from the pulpit while surrounded by symbols of excess. They preach generosity while storing donations in accounts that never seem to run dry. They ask followers to sacrifice, yet their own lives are sheltered from the very struggles they claim to understand. It becomes difficult to take moral lessons seriously when the messenger does not live by them. A sermon on detachment loses force when spoken beneath a chandelier. A lecture on compassion feels empty when delivered by someone who steps over the homeless outside the temple doors. Wealth is not inherently immoral, but the contradiction between teaching selflessness and practicing indulgence creates a gap too large to ignore. And yet this pattern persists. It continues because the appearance of righteousness is easier to maintain than the practice of it. It continues because luxury disguised as holiness has become tradition. It continues because few people dare to question it aloud. The moral gymnastics of do as I say, not as I do. When a religious leader fails morally, you would expect the system to tremble. You would expect the community to question how someone trusted with spiritual authority could ignore the very principles they demand from everyone else. In any other setting, a collapse of credibility would follow immediately, because the gap between words and actions tells the entire story. But inside organized faith, something entirely different takes place. Instead of accountability, a strange performance begins. The rules begin to stretch in ways they were never meant to. New interpretations appear that soften the seriousness of what happened. Entirely new categories of forgiveness and explanation are invented on the spot. You start hearing familiar phrases repeated with absolute conviction. He is only human. It was a moment of weakness. It was a test from above. God forgives. The community must forgive too. Every explanation works like a cushion placed under the falling leader, ensuring he lands softly while the victims or the congregation bear the weight. And notice what no one ever says. No one says that he has lost his authority. No one says he has forfeited trust. No one says he should step aside for the good of the community. Those sentences are treated as unthinkable because authority in these systems is not rooted in genuine virtue. It is rooted in the institution's need to preserve the image of stability and sacred order. If a leader falls and is removed, it would expose the system's vulnerability. It would show that virtue was never the qualification in the first place. So the illusion is guarded at any cost. The community is encouraged to forget rather than remember. The leader is restored rather than replaced. The institution protects the symbol because symbols matter more than truth. And in that quiet exchange, morality bends just a little more, until the bending itself becomes normal. When fear replaces ethics, true morality only exists when a person is genuinely free to choose their actions. It lives in the space where someone can question the rules, where they can disagree openly, where they can walk away without threats hanging over their head. Morality is born from clarity, not coercion. It grows from understanding, not intimidation. It becomes meaningful only when an individual has the freedom to decide what is right based on conscience rather than punishment. But organized faith rarely creates that kind of space. Instead, it surrounds morality with fear. Fear becomes the invisible fence that keeps people inside the boundaries. The fear of hell burns in the background of every decision. The fear of sin makes even harmless actions feel dangerous. The fear of divine anger makes people obey teachings they never had the chance to understand. Entire moral systems become shaped not by compassion or reason, but by anxiety about what might happen after death. And here is the contradiction. If your sense of right and wrong disappears the moment fear is removed, then it was never morality to begin with. It was a survival mechanism taught through repetition and pressure. It was obedience dressed up as virtue. Real ethical understanding does not crumble when fear fades. It grows stronger because it is guided by empathy and responsibility instead of threats. Obedience may look peaceful from the outside, but on the inside it is simply control maintained through psychological pressure. People follow the rules not because they believe in them, but because they are afraid to question them. They avoid wrongdoing not because they understand harm, but because they fear punishment. And when obedience is mistaken for morality, entire generations are taught to behave without ever learning how to think. That is how fear quietly replaces ethics, until people confuse silence with goodness and compliance with integrity. The hypocrisy of selective morality. When you look closely at the moral rules inside organized religion, something immediately feels off. Not every wrongdoing is treated the same way. Some actions are condemned loudly from the pulpit, while others are quietly excused. It creates a strange kind of moral landscape where consequences depend less on the harm caused and more on which parts of the hierarchy are threatened. Why are certain sins treated like catastrophic failures while others are barely mentioned? Why do sexual mistakes draw shock and outrage, while greed, manipulation, or cruelty can exist for years without any serious consequence? Why do leaders who violate trust receive swift forgiveness, while ordinary believers are told to repent endlessly for far smaller actions? Why are women judged more harshly than men, carrying shame for behaviors that men are simply told to avoid next time? These inconsistencies do not appear by accident. They have a purpose. Selective morality has nothing to do with genuine ethics. It has everything to do with maintaining control. Sexual behavior is policed so aggressively because it is personal, emotional, and easy to shame. Shame keeps people compliant. Greed or political corruption inside leadership is tolerated because confronting it would threaten the power structure itself. A leader forgiven instantly reinforces the idea that authority is sacred. A believer punished endlessly reinforces the idea that authority must be obeyed. This selective outrage reveals what the institution truly values. Not fairness, not compassion, not consistency. It values the preservation of hierarchy. Anything that strengthens the structure is minimized. Anything that challenges it is inflated into a moral crisis. And here is the deeper truth. Once morality becomes selective, once it favors the powerful and burdens the powerless, once it shifts depending on who benefits and who suffers, it can no longer be called morality at all. It is simply another tool of obedience disguised as virtue. The system rewards the wrong people. Think for a moment about what qualities allow someone to climb the ranks inside organized religion. It is rarely compassion, it is rarely humility, it is almost never honesty. The traits that rise to the top are obedience to the institution, the ability to command attention, a strong presence that looks authoritative, and a carefully crafted image that fits the expectations of holiness. These qualities create the perfect performer, someone who can speak with conviction, maintain tradition, and appear morally superior without ever being required to prove that superiority through real actions. The system naturally gravitates toward these performers because they are predictable. They defend doctrine without questioning it. They maintain the structure without challenging it. They speak the right language, wear the right clothing, and show the right expressions. In many religious communities, appearances are more important than inner character. A person who looks holy is treated as holy long before anyone asks if they actually live by the values they preach. This creates a quiet but powerful distortion. People who truly embody empathy, honesty, and moral courage often struggle in these environments because those traits can be inconvenient. Empathy may push them to challenge harmful teachings. Honesty may force them to expose abuses. Moral courage may compel them to confront leaders who misuse their authority. The institution does not reward these behaviors. It punishes them. So the ones who rise are the ones who conform. They learn how to perform righteousness on stage while hiding their failures behind it. They learn how to inspire trust even when they do not deserve it. And over time, the gap between appearance and reality widens until the scandals that emerge at the top no longer seem shocking. They become predictable. Not because all leaders are corrupt, but because the system was designed to elevate performers rather than practitioners. When institutions apologize without changing. Whenever a religious institution is caught in wrongdoing, It unfolds almost like a rehearsed performance. The community erupts in outrage. Leaders step forward with words that sound solemn and heavy. They offer apologies that feel polished and carefully measured. They invite everyone into prayer, asking for healing and unity. Then the congregation is encouraged to forgive, to move forward, to restore harmony and trust. And at first glance, it seems sincere. It feels like something meaningful is happening. But once the emotional smoke clears, something unsettling becomes obvious. Nothing actually changes. The structures stay the same. The leaders remain in place. The policies that enabled the harm stay untouched. New promises are made, but old habits continue. It is as if the apology itself becomes the solution, as if acknowledging the harm frees the institution from having to correct the conditions that caused it. There is a reason this cycle repeats. Real change threatens hierarchy. Real change exposes the flaws in leadership. Real change risks revealing that the institution is not the moral authority it claims to be. And because the image of divine guidance must remain unshaken, leaders choose the safer option. They choose to look moral instead of becoming moral. They choose to perform accountability without embracing it. They choose to protect the structure even when the structure is the problem. This cycle is not an accident. It is a strategy. Outrage is absorbed. Apologies are offered. Tears are shed. Prayers are spoken. Forgiveness is encouraged. And once emotions settle, the institution quietly returns to the way things were. The pattern repeats so smoothly that most people barely notice the lack of progress. This is how the illusion survives. The appearance of morality replaces the substance of it, and the wheel keeps turning, again and again. The collapse of credibility. People today are not walking away from religion because they suddenly want to rebel or because they are searching for chaos. Most leave quietly, after a long period of watching the people they trusted fail to live by the very values they teach. The shift is not rooted in anger. It is rooted in disappointment. When leaders preach humility while living in comfort and excess, something breaks. When they preach purity while hiding abuse within their own walls, trust collapses. When they preach morality but cannot follow their own rules, the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Once those contradictions appear, believers begin to ask questions. Gentle questions at first, questions meant to understand, not attack. But those questions rarely receive honest answers. Instead, they are met with excuses, deflection, or warnings not to question too deeply, and that only intensifies the doubt. Because once the mind starts connecting the patterns, the unraveling begins. You cannot unsee the hypocrisy once it reveals itself. You cannot unknow the corruption once the stories are no longer isolated incidents but repeated behaviors across generations and continents. You cannot pretend the system is functioning when its failures are visible in headlines, in courtrooms, and in the whispered stories of people who were told to be silent. This is the real morality crisis. It is not about people losing faith in some spiritual sense. It is about institutions losing the credibility required to guide anyone. It is about leaders who demand moral authority without demonstrating moral character. It is about systems that claim to protect souls but cannot even protect the vulnerable within their own halls. People did not stop believing in goodness. They stopped believing the institution could deliver it. And once that distinction becomes clear, it becomes impossible to return to the old illusions. Maybe the deepest problem with organized faith isn't what it teaches, but what it protects. It protects image over truth, authority over accountability, institutions over individuals. And when morality becomes a brand, it loses its soul. But here's the hopeful part. Morality doesn't disappear when you walk away from corrupt systems. It becomes clearer, cleaner, more honest. Because real morality doesn't need a robe. It doesn't need a title. It doesn't need a building. It's in the choices we make when no one is watching. It's in how we treat people when there's nothing to gain. It's in the courage to question what we once accepted blindly. If you value truth over tradition, clarity over comfort, and morality over authority, subscribe, stay curious, and keep thinking for yourself. Because no institution deserves your morality more than you do.